Hey everyone, and welcome back to MEIOU and Taxes 2.5. First things first, pretty sure the mic quality's noticeably better this time around. Let me know if that's the case or not down below. I appreciate it for sure. With that being said, today we're going to be talking all about communication efficiency. What it is, how it works, how it affects you, how you affect it, everything. But before we really get too deep into things, just want to give a big shout out to the MEIOU and Taxes mod team. Um, the amount of work these guys have put into this project is just literally unfathomable. Um, they've worked so hard to create, all this amazing content for us to play and have fun with, totally free of charge. And I really can't say enough how much I appreciate that. Um, this is an incredible project, and it's just been so much fun to play and experience for myself. So big ups to those guys. I really appreciate y'all. You guys are the best. Keep up the fantastic work. So now that that's out of the way, communication efficiency. What is communication efficiency, or CE as I'll probably call it here on out? Communication efficiency is MEIOU and Taxes modeling the inefficiencies of a bureaucracy when it comes to long distances from a capital. So, for instance, if China gets declared, Britain declares war on China, trade war, what have you, real world example. It'll take a substantial amount of time for someone on a horse to go from their capital to, the western parts of their empire and tell them, hey, we're at war, you guys need to give us some troops. And the way that's modeled in MEIOU and Taxes is, in general, the farther a province is from your home capital, the more unrest it's going to have and the more local autonomy gain it's going to have. So basically, it just models how long it takes for instructions, orders, information even to reach provinces from your capital. And it's listed here in days, but as you might notice later on, it probably doesn't take, for instance, 2 days to travel from London to Essex on horseback. That might be a 6-hour journey. Could even be as short as, 6 or 3 hour actual real world travel time. But in the game, it's modeled in days, and it's not intended to be realistic, realistic real world travel times. It's just a number that, we as players can wrap our heads around and can understand when that number moves up or down. So don't take these days as being anywhere close to realistic times it would actually take someone to go from A to B. So, in a nutshell, it's an anti-blobbing mechanic. The farther away you are from your capital, the more unrest and more local autonomy. So you're not going to get as much from the provinces, and the provinces are much more likely to rebel, especially considering you're probably not going to have every culture accepted in your empire, or at least everyone that's on the outskirts of your empire accepted. So you're not really going to be able to negate these debuffs once they reach a certain point. So it's a pretty nice anti-blobbing mechanic. Really incentivizes you to conquer smart and then build smart in the areas you conquer. Now, how exactly does it work? So, it's all based on a system that utilizes what are called runners. So these runners will hop from province to province, and they'll record the amount of time it takes. Now, there's two ways that runners can travel. Runners can travel over water, from a port to another port, a coastal province, or they can travel over land. And we'll talk about that overland travel here first. So you can see here in Cambridge, there's perfect communication, travel time of 2 days, and the runner origin, which, by the way, is absolutely so incredibly useful, comes directly from London, our capital. Now in Derby, the runner goes through Oxford, and then from Oxford, it goes to London. So you can get a really good idea of how runners travel based on, just reading the tooltips. Fantastic tooltips. 12 out of 10 changed when they were added a few patches ago before 2.5. So the exact way that runners propagate overland is they start in your capital province, and your capital province will send one runner to each adjacent overland province. So Essex, Cambridge, Oxford, all these 5 provinces right here will each get a land runner directly from London. The travel time that runner takes to reach that province is then recorded and saved. And once a province has received a runner and has established a quickest possible travel time, it's then going to send out runners in all adjacent provinces except for the one that it received the runner from. So London's not going to get any more runners, period, just because everything next to it's going to have a really quick travel time. And runners don't flow back up the chain. So you're always going to have 0 communication time in your capital. And you're never going to get an instance where Cambridge is going to take a runner from Derby who comes from Oxford, stuff like that. So runners are always going to keep the quickest travel time. So you can see Derby's, like we showed earlier, 237, comes directly from Oxford. So both Cambridge and Oxford send runners to Derby once they both receive runners from London. And then Derby picks the quicker of all the runners it receives. It probably receives more than just these 2 provinces. But then Derby's going to pick the quickest runner that reaches it, and then it's going to send out runners in all directions. And you can see West Riding here. Doesn't pull from Derby, it pulls from Lincoln. So between Derby and Lincoln, Lincoln wins out in the travel time to West Riding. So the tooltips, like I said, are just absolutely phenomenal in determining, where runners travel, what paths they take, how you want to build up your road network to impact it, etc. So really useful, these tooltips. I just can't say it enough. So that's how overland runners will propagate. They kind of propagate out in waves, kind of like a radio tower would send out a signal in concentric circles. Now, the other type of runners are waterborne runners, or ocean-going runners, what have you. These guys aren't exactly as simple, but once you understand the mechanic, it's just as intuitive. The way ocean-going runners operate is they work off of these trade harbor buildings, and to a lesser extent the fishing port, but I'll go into detail on that in a little bit. If you have a level 1 trade wharf or greater in a province, whether it be a capital or otherwise, once it receives a runner and once it's established a runner travel time to the province, it's then going to send out ocean-going runners of its own to other provinces with trade harbor buildings in them. So we can see that Norfolk here with a level 3 trade harbor actually gets its quickest travel time straight from London through 2 sea provinces and then back on to land. And then East Riding in turn will receive its quickest runner from Norfolk. So in a similar way that runners propagate over land, they also propagate over water. And you can also have instances of, for instance here in Loudoun gets its runner directly from East Riding. There's also a level 3 trade harbor directly in between the two. This is what's referred to as a relay port. This trade harbor here is going to help out the travel time between these two provinces. And the greater the distance between these two provinces, the more that's true. So for instance, I have, the Azores over here with the level 2 trade harbor. And we also have, there's a few ports down here that probably benefit from the level 2 trade harbors. I've kind of plopped down here and around, but definitely around Iberia you can see, we got the ports really going. Same with northern France. So this is what a mid-game port network should really look like. You want to have, pretty often spaced ports, as high level as you can really get them, and that's really going to help out your travel time. So they'll propagate through these ports, and then if the over-water travel time is shorter, or if the overall travel time is shorter than the quickest overall land travel time, then they'll use that over-water travel time and then reflect that time back out to other provinces that have a trade harbor connection with it. So in a nutshell, that's really how runners propagate. It's kind of like waves from a radio tower. Over land, it's really concentric circle-ish as far as how the spread actually propagates. And then over water, it's just dependent on where your ports are and the geography of the situation. So, it's important to note that each day traveled of communication time will give you 0.35 local unrest and 0.16 points of local autonomy. And you can see here that, the days of travel time is rounded, whereas the local unrest and the autonomy gain are much more close to, what the values actually are. You have 4.25 and 0.194. So while those numbers are exact, the days do definitely get rounded, especially when, 2 days 1.03, 2 days 1.09. So what determines how long it takes for a runner to go from one province to the next? Well, overland travel times are determined by 3 things: the size of each province, the terrain of each province, and the level of roads in each province. So you can see that both these provinces are farmlands. This is favorable terrain, so it takes 3 times the base travel time, or 3 times the province size, for a runner to travel across. So if you have a bunch of small provinces, like Flanders, Antwerp, Brussels, the travel time is not going to be nearly as long just from the province size as you would from something like Auvergne. So there's province size, and there's also terrain. There's 3 types of terrain when it comes to how they affect CE. There is favorable, there's challenging, and then there's rugged. And you can see you can read the exact, effects: 6 times the size, times dirty. And then 4 times, and then 3 times the size for favorable. So the worse the terrain, the longer it takes runners to travel through one province and then go to the next. And the last thing that affects overland travel times is roads. So roads are really the only way that the player can impact where your runners go, how long it takes them to go from one place to the next. If you're given some empire, roads are the only thing you can do to improve the overland CE network that you're dealing with. So roads, depending on their level, will increase or decrease the amount of time a runner will take to cross that province. So you can see that on an absolute basis, roads help out in rugged terrain much more than they do in favorable terrain, with challenging kind of falling into that midpoint. So roads are really good at knocking travel times down. We saw a travel time of 9 days from West Riding to London, purely overland. That's definitely pretty solid for that distance. And we do have level 2 roads. It is favorable terrain all the way through, or at least up until West Riding, where it becomes rugged. So roads are really important for building up a solid overland CE network. In particular, the way you want to build roads is if you have really big cities, you're definitely going to want to put a solid road in between them, especially if that ends up being the quickest travel time from one big city to another. So the real high level roads, your highways, your rail networks, those are pretty much exclusively for communication arteries or just roads in between big cities. You can kind of look at the bonuses they give here. Roads will all give, trade power, urban gravity, supply limit, friendly movement speed, and they'll give a little bit of hostile movement speed as well. So they're pretty good at helping you move your armies around your empire. But just keep in mind that enemy armies can also use them just to a lesser extent, half as much of a benefit as you get from them. So they're really useful, especially if you're playing something like Persia and you just got terrible terrain that it takes months and months to move your armies through. Roads can be really helpful in alleviating that. They're also fantastic just to build in really big cities because of the urban production power they give, and that urban gravity. Even the trade power too, to a lesser extent, is quite nice. That flat trade power is pretty solid. So you can see there's pretty substantial benefits once you get up to the higher tier of roads. But notice that in between the highway network and the railway network, which only comes into play at Diptech 50, and let's be honest, how many of you play till 1800 or whatever that ends up being. But just take note that the base urban gravity and the urban gravity modifier are the exact same for these two. So you don't actually get any more urban gravity from these railway networks. You do get more production power, and you do get more trade power, both in the flat value and the modifier. So they're still really good to build in your big cities, but they're just not going to fuel growth any more than a level 3 road does. So just keep that in mind. Again, mostly for these higher tiers of roads, big cities, or just cities in general, and communication arteries. These level 1 roads you can get away with almost anywhere. The maintenance cost is just so small that you often can make that maintenance cost back, no problems at all, from the autonomy reduction you get. if the province population is big enough and if the travel time reduction is large enough. So level 1 roads you can get away with almost anywhere. Even in places like rural Germany, level 1 roads are just really great to just spam out. But save the higher tier roads for your cities and your communication arteries. So that's pretty much roads in a nutshell. Now, how is waterborne CE affected? Again, it's also affected by the province size. And there's one line of buildings you can build that'll definitely help out, and that's those trade harbor buildings we talked about a little bit earlier. So like I was saying, the trade harbor buildings allow runners to be sent and received from coastal provinces to other coastal provinces. And the better the trade harbor, the better this benefit. So, well, I'm sure you're asking exactly how much benefit is there. The exact benefit is as follows. The Trade Wharf Rank 1 receives the base travel time from ocean province to ocean province, or coastal province to coastal province. The Rank 2 Trade Harbor gets if it's present at both ends, gets a 20% reduction in travel time. If the Rank 3 harbor is present at both ends, there's a 35% reduction in travel time. And if the Rank 4 harbor is present at both ends, you'll get a 50% reduction in the travel time. Now keep in mind that doesn't reduce, the overall travel time that it takes. It just reduces the time that one specific jump takes. And if you have, let's say, a level 3 trade harbor at one end and maybe a level 1 trade harbor at another, it'll take the average of those two. So in that particular instance, it would be a 17.5% reduction in the travel time from a level 1 to a level 3, compared to 35% from level 3 to a level 3. So it's really important to upgrade your ports when you unlock them, especially, if you're playing a country like London, you got a coastal, playing a country like England, you got a coastal capital. A lot of your CE is going to propagate out of your capital if it's coastal. And if you have a really good port network, very oftentimes the travel time from waterborne runners is going to be much faster than overland runners. But that's not always necessarily the case. So you can see Wessex here gets its fastest runner from Oxford. So it's actually faster to go from London to Oxford to Wessex overland than it is to go from London straight to Wessex over water. But once it gets to Wessex, it's faster to go over water straight to Glasgow than it is to go overland through Devon in between the two. So if the distance is a straight line, and if the over water distance is comparable to the overland distance, it's not obviously beat out by a big margin, the waterborne travel time is probably going to win. Especially if you have these high-level ports, rank 3s, rank 4s. They give a really substantial bonus to the travel time. And even though I have rank 2 roads in all these provinces, and some of the terrain is challenging, true enough, but waterborne runners are for the most part much quicker. Now, it does take a lot of money to build up to trade harbors this high level. So you do have to keep that in mind when you are planning on, setting up a port for communication purposes somewhere. That, yeah, this level 3 trade harbor does require this great city hall rank 3. And that's a pretty substantial investment to build into, when you're talking 750% increased construction cost, or 650 from buildings alone. So the cost of doing this can really add up, but it can also be incredibly beneficial if the distance you're traversing is very large. it's definitely going to be quicker to build up a bunch of ports and have them send CE all the way down to the Mediterranean than it would be to have roads do it instead. And you can kind of see this here. Extremadura has 230, comes from, oh yeah, I remember now. This province, for instance, only takes 16 days to get from here to get from Gloucester all the way down. And that's because of all these ports we have, in between. All these level 3 ports in between are just so helpful. And even these level 2s right here, which is really helpful for reducing the overall travel time between these two provinces. So relay ports are really good. Ports are just really good in general. But don't skip out on your roads. Roads can also be very important, especially if overland's your only option, which often enough times that's absolutely the case. Or sometimes if you're Venice, who, hey, is actually dead, then over water is going to be your only real option, coming down here. And especially if you're going colonial, you just need a good CE network. It's really crucial to have nice travel times, especially in these few provinces. This one in particular, not a member of a trade company, so you still need good CE down here to North Africa if you don't want to deal with revolts all game. So port infrastructure, again, is really the only way you can affect waterborne CE, but you can affect it to such a great degree, a far greater degree than you can affect overland travel. Relay ports are really important. High-level trade harbors, super crucial for just getting those low travel times that you want to see. So, now that we kind of have an understanding of how communication efficiency works in a nutshell, you have your overland runners, your waterborne runners, your roads, your trade harbors, your terrain, your province size, and your distances. Another really important mechanic is the regional capital building, or capital buildings in general. What capital buildings do is they do two different things based on where they're placed. If they're placed in your capital province, what a capital building will do is it'll reduce the travel time it takes for runners to travel across your entire empire. So every jump, be it overland or over water, for the Ottomans is reduced by 5% because of their capital in Istanbul. And we have a level 5 capital in London. And that's going to reduce, again, every overland province to province jump, every waterborne runner's jump, it's going to reduce it by 15%. And this is a pretty substantial reduction in travel time, especially when you consider all the other modifiers you get from roads and ports. It can definitely make a huge difference, especially once you start really blobbing out. Very super important to build this up in your capital. It does cost a heck of a lot of money, but I think it's very much worth it. The urban gravity is absolutely incredible, which is a nice side benefit, and you get a pretty good amount of monthly local autonomy, which is nice to help counteract stuff like a continental, all the buildings from like your world famous university that you're pretty much going to have in your capital at some point. It pretty much nullifies that autonomy straight away. So the local autonomy is nice. The states are just awesome to have. The urban gravity is incredible, and the travel time across your empire is incredible. So really important to start building up the capital buildings in your capital province once you have the money to do so. It's a really good investment, and specifically, the amount of benefit you get from each level of capital is you get 5% travel time reduction from the level 1, as we saw in Istanbul. You get 7.5% travel time reduction from level 2, 10% reduction from level 3, 12.5% from level 4, and then 15% from level 5. So if you can afford it, I mean, even going up, 1 or 2 levels of the Capitol building, once you hit the mid-game, can be really powerful and really help you get that autonomy down in those far-flung provinces. Help you core stuff maybe a little bit faster, just give you more coming in directly to you instead of your estates, which is always a good thing. Now, when these buildings are placed outside of your capital, they work a little bit differently. And in particular, these buildings are referred to as regional capitals, or at least that's how you'll hear me refer to them. The way these regional capitals work is they work similarly to capital buildings in the capital, but on a much more localized level. So the way that actually plays out is once your CE network has been figured out, the calculations have been done, your land runners have been sent, your water runners have been sent. Once that's done, the game's going to look for these regional capital buildings. And it's going to say, oh, there's a regional capital building in Loudoun. Okay. What that capital building is going to do is it's going to reduce the travel time it takes to reach that province by a percentage value and then by a flat number of days based on the level of regional capital that's present. So, to be specific, level 1 regional capital buildings will reduce the overall travel time, so not just the latest jump, but the total travel time it takes to get there, by 30%. And after that reduction is done, they'll also take an additional flat 4 days off of the travel time. A level 2 regional capital building, again outside of your capital province, will reduce travel time by 45% and then by a flat 6-day reduction. And level 3s will reduce travel time by 55% and then a flat 7-day reduction. But that reduction does not stack any further than that 55% and 7-day flat reduction you get from a level 3 regional capital. So you're not going, at least as far as, the end result of the travel time that the province receives, is not going to get any better if you build up a regional capital to 4 or 5. Sure, you're still going to get the extra states, you're still going to get the local autonomy, and you're still going to get, the maintenance and the urban gravity that's associated with these, 4 and 5 level capital buildings. But it's generally not recommended to place level 4 and 5 capital buildings outside of your capital province because they just don't do nearly as much for you. Well, in fact, they don't do anything for you as far as reducing the travel time any further than a level 3 regional capital does. So just keep that in mind. If you're really trying to build up a big city, go for it. If you have the money, go for it. But, you can spend your money better other places, in other regional capitals, where you can get better travel time reduction. So, since Loudoun now has a 2-day travel time, that travel time is going to propagate out similar to how runners start from your capital. So Loudoun's going to send overland and overwater runners to the surrounding provinces. And if Loudoun, with its 2-day communication time, can establish a quicker travel time to places like the Marches than, maybe this port here in Northumberland could, it's definitely going to prefer to use the overall lowest total travel time. Considering that, Loudoun's now is 2 days. It's going to be much better than the 6 days. Well, hey, Northumberland even uses Loudoun. Yeah. And I can't get enough of these freaking tooltips. They're just so fantastic. So all three of these provinces pull CE from Loudoun, but East Riding's a little bit far away. And if the runner from Loudoun reaches East Riding later than its original runner, from London to Norfolk, then East Riding, then East Riding's still going to use the quickest travel time. So its travel time won't change due to this capital in Loudoun. Additionally, regional capitals do not stack. So for instance, I have a regional capital in Guyana, level 1, and a level 1 regional capital in Lisbon. In previous versions of the mod, they did use to stack. And the way it would work is Guyana would get a travel time reduction due to its regional capital, and then it would pass that communication bonus on far outside of how quickly, whether or not the runners reach somewhere quicker or not. Lisbon would see that Guyana had a regional capital, and it would end up being able to pull its shortest overall travel time from Guyana. And you'd be able to stack regional capitals to a pretty significant degree that way. It was really easy with a lot of level 1 capitals to just get, near perfect communication times across your entire empire for not that much investment. But that strategy since it's been nerfed, and now regional capitals do not stack anymore. So once, regional capital is outcompeted either by another regional capital or by the original runners that were calculated from, your capital itself, then the effectiveness of it is basically going to stop. So this regional capital in Loudoun has no effect on East Riding because it gets a quicker time to travel from Norfolk and London, if that makes sense. So the regional capitals only affect a small localized area of provinces. You're not really going to see Guyana reaching too far out. Probably not past a distance like this. There's only one sea tile here, so it's a pretty quick jump. But something like Bro-Gernev is still going to get its quickest travel time from the original setup, to Gloucester through Oxford from London. Yeah, and even Bro-Wined is too far away for Guyana to be able to reach out and reduce its travel time. But again, this is only a level 1 capital building. You're going to see a lot bigger reductions with level 2 and 3 capital buildings, significantly bigger. And it's pretty much up in the air as far as what to build where. There's so many factors in play. How much population is going to be affected, how much development's here, how much building infrastructure's here, how much does the construction cost increase based on the level of the capital, and when is it best worth to build a capital based on balancing how much infrastructure you already have versus the construction cost that gets added on. I really don't think it's worth it to sit down and calculate all that out. Don't get me wrong, you can. If you think it's worthwhile, feel free to just min-max to that degree. But if you have an understanding of the communication efficiency system as a whole, then I think that's all you really need to be able to make intelligent decisions when it comes to placing these capital buildings. For instance, the reason why I placed Guyana, or regional capital in Guyana, big city, productive city, already had a lot of infrastructure built, already had a nice port built up, and so there's a lot of high population land here. If you look at development, yeah, pretty nicely developed here. Portugal was more of a choice because it's such a long travel distance that I just really needed something to reduce the travel times in these provinces. Personally, for me, in the core of my empire, I try and keep things under 20 days or so. Um, Anything over 20 days is just far too autonomous and far too rebellious for my liking. So, regional capitals are going to, do a lot of work for me down here in Andalusia and Portugal. But really, there's so many factors in play that it's almost impossible to develop a mathematical formula of when you should build a regional capital and where. Because there's so many things that affect local autonomy, whether it's separatism, communication efficiency, your government type, your culture, which estate controls the provinces, whether it's a stated core, territorial core, or not a core. I mean, there's just so many factors in play that it's really not worth your time to look into things to that big of a degree. And again, feel free to if you want to, but I just don't consider it worth my time to. Development will tell you a lot, and a general understanding of how communication efficiency works will help too. I'm using Provence as a big relay port into the Mediterranean. With all these little places that I'm going to have to end up getting good communication efficiency out to. So there's a regional capital there to kind of help out with this area. And from there, I mean, it's really just a question of where you want to improve your autonomy. If you've got some new land you want to help rein in, or if you just don't have that much centralization and you need it to pump down the autonomy in your core. It's all up to you. So, with that being said, there's one more thing I wanted to discuss. These level 4 trade harbors, they can only be built in really specific places. And the level 3s to a lesser extent. You'll see here on the level 3, the province cannot have no harbor or a delta estuary modifier. So what that means is that if the province doesn't have, a harbor modifier, you're not going to be able to build those higher level ports in that province. And even the level 2s can't be built in the delta estuary. This tooltip is actually outdated. You can build level 2s outside of harbor locations. For instance, Murcia here, you'll see no harbor. Level 2 is buildable. Level 3s might even be the case for that too. Yeah, see, level 3s you can actually build outside of no harbor too. I thought that was the case. But delta estuary is definitely a no-go. The delta estuary part of this tooltip is absolutely correct. You can build the level 1 trade harbor. Oh, no harbor. This is the modifier that you can't have. If you have this modifier in a province, you straight up can't build a trade harbor, period. If you have the delta estuary modifier, which, oh man, do I gotta go find one in India now? I'll find one at some point. I believe both of these are categorized as delta estuaries. But very frequently, I know India, this river that comes out of western India is absolutely a delta estuary. Like 90% confident both of these tiles are. I guess not. Curious. So, the delta estuary modifier is anathema to harbors. Anything higher than a level 1. The level 4, the Great Port and Lighthouse. You'll see it requires a natural harbor. So what does that mean? Well, natural harbors come in 2 different sizes and flavors. The small natural harbor, which I'll find a clean modifier. Small natural harbor is this icon right here. little anchor, the white anchor on a background, denotes a small natural harbor is present in this province. Um, there are some exceptions. For instance, the Weser. If you see the text natural harbor, even though the icon's an estuary, there's still a small natural harbor in that province. So there's some exceptions. This is not always, the estuary modifier is not always just going to be an estuary. Sometimes there will be a harbor there. But for the most part, these anchors are what you're looking for when you're talking a small natural harbor. A great natural harbor has this icon. It looks like a little bay or some sort of inlet with water. This denotes that a great natural harbor is present in the province. I'm not sure if any of the text will say the words great natural harbor. I don't believe any of them do. But if you see that icon, you can pretty much know, hey, yeah, great natural harbor. The reason that is important for us in talking about communication efficiency, yeah, you can see natural harbor, just an estuary. Great natural harbor. The reason it's important is because when you're looking at natural harbors and great natural harbors, those have an effectiveness on the time it takes for any jump that enters or leaves their province. So for instance, Wessex has a great natural harbor. Kent has a small natural harbor. The way small natural harbors work is they provide a 5% reduction to the travel time of a jump that either originates in or lands at their province. Great natural harbors provide a 15% reduction in overwater jumps, again, either originating in their province or ending in their province. So if you have a lot of great harbors that are chained up, for instance these two, then you're definitely going to see really quick travel times between the two. There's a lot of great harbors on the map, and especially when you're talking like the colonial game, super important to control. They'll give you those really good times, those travel times you couldn't get otherwise. That 15% from the Great Natural Harbor is huge. And again, you need a natural harbor of some form or fashion to build this level 4 trade harbor at all. So the harbors are really important to control. It's really nice to build your trade harbors in provinces with natural harbors, just because there's a lot of synergy there. So if you're ever thinking, I gotta find a good port for my inland capital to reach, you're really looking for a natural harbor. Stettin's a natural choice for Brandenburg. Danzig's is a pretty nice choice for Poland if they ever feel like really jumping out into the Baltic. Obviously Constantinople is fantastic, or Istanbul I should say, is fantastic. And there's a lot of other natural harbors, stuffed around the world that you'll end up finding. And that'll be really good for you to take over, put into a trade company, give you some nice CE over there. I'm trying to think if I left anything out. In case I hadn't mentioned it yet, the exact amount of autonomy and unrest you get from communication time is for each day of time it takes for a runner to end up at a province. So for the overall travel time that ends up being recorded on this province screen, for each day you're going to get 0.35 points of local unrest and 0.016 increased local autonomy. So you can see it's not always going to be exact because the days, that communication time in days is very much a heavily rounded number, whereas the local unrest and monthly autonomy aren't nearly rounded to such a great an extent. So you see a little bit of fluctuation between 2-day travel time provinces, and that's normal. But if the time lines up perfectly, then you'll see, 0.35 unrest and 0.016 local autonomy progression per day of travel time. So, with all that being said, guys, I'm pretty sure that's it with regards to communication efficiency. You have your overland runners, your water runners, your roads and your ports, and your regional capitals. Once you understand how those 5 things work in concert with each other, building a good CE network becomes really intuitive. And it'll also help you, have a good idea of what are good lands to conquer. If you're England, if you're not blobbed out as massive as I am, and you're trying to compete with Portugal in the colonial game, it might be a good idea to take, some port provinces, increase your colonial range, get good CE down there. Stuff like that. The more game knowledge you have, the better you can perform at the game. And communication efficiency is just so crucial to understand in order to just even be competent at M&T. But it's such a cool mechanic that I really enjoy the intricacies of it, just the amount of time you can spend sitting around trying to figure out what road to build where and what port to build when and how. It's a really cool mechanic, and I think it's a really intuitive way to just reduce the amount of blobbing that a tag is capable of accomplishing, especially because the AI is actually quite good at building up ports and roads, but the AI will always be the AI, and it's nice to see them get the brakes pumped on them, especially Ottomans when they try and go in on the Mamluks. It's always nice to see that. So, in conclusion, yeah, anti-blob mechanic, roads, ports, terrain, regional capitals. Most of the tooltips are pretty much explained. At least, not to the degree that I just spent talking about, but they'll explain the broad strokes of how this stuff works. So read your tooltips, guys. Check the wiki. Might not always be up to date, but the core information that's presented there, the concepts, are usually they're sound and they're at least relevant. So with that being said, a few months ago we had a really good discussion on Reddit about communication efficiency and how exactly it works, and we discussed things to an even greater degree than I did in this video. So I'll link that post below, and you can dive in there as well if you really feel like getting even dirtier than you spent the last half hour or so getting. But that's pretty much it for me today, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.